Hello everybody, my name is Gerben. I'm an instructor at Juniper Networks Education Services. In this Learning Byte, I will explain options that Ringmaster has for controlling user access. Here we are in the Ringmaster management environment, the HTTPS management environment which controls the behavior of the Ringmaster services. That is a different environment than the Ringmaster client, which actually connects to this Ringmaster services environment. In here we are at the landing page, the home page, and it shows us that we have a plan active. The current plan active is called user access, specially built for this purpose. And to have a closer look at user access control, Ringmaster user access, we have to go to access control. In this section, you see that we've got four main categories. We've got settings, we've got user access groups, we've got radio servers, and we have user locking. Let's first go to the settings in this settings environment. The first thing that you see here is that we have an enable or login required. We can only select that if there are any actual users. You see that in the local database there are currently no users, and we cannot add one because that button is grayed out as well. So you cannot create any new users until you have created a user access group. Once a user access group exists, we can create users, etc. So either by clicking on this link or directly going to user access group here, we can then click this button to add a user access group. The first user access group that I'm going to create is the group for admin purposes. So I'm going to create a group admin users. And as you see, when we select allow server administration, it also gives the admin users full configuration privileges and full monitoring privileges. Let's create a group. There we go, we've got the group. You see it has admin privileges next to having configuration and monitoring privileges. If we now go back to settings, we can now create our admin user. Let's call that one admin. Make it a member of the user access group admin users. Type a password. And add the user. Now we have a user in place, we also have the ability to click the enable login required button. When we want to do some other things like user locking, you see that it is not possible to do anything like that. That is only possible, just like configuring radio services, if you have access control enabled. So we first have to go back to settings and enable access control. As long as you've not clicked this button, there is no requirement from Ringmaster to identify your connection to the Ringmaster services with a username and a password. That might sound like a security breach, but do remember that by default, connectivity to the Ringmaster services is only possible on the machine itself, because by default the Ringmaster services only listens on the loopback IP address 127.0.0.1. Let's click this one, and then you see that because we activated access control, we have to log in ourselves. So let's log in. We do that with the user admin and our password, and now we're logged in. When we now go to user locking, you see that we can change our locking period. And if we would set that to 0, then a faulty error would cause a permanent lock. But that would only be after 3 attempts by default. Let's set the lock to 3 minutes, make it a little bit shorter, and save that configuration. Also now we can enable authentication against a radio server. When we enable authentication against a radio server, usernames and passwords of users connecting to Ringmaster, whether it's in this HTTPS environment or with the client, will be authenticated against the radio servers that we can specify. We can specify a second radio server, as you can see here below, but all those users will be allowed access to Ringmaster environment with the user group that you specify here. Currently, we only have one user group, so if we now would do it like this, then any user authenticating against a radio server would become a user with admin rights. Now that's of course an undesired situation, but realize that you can do that for any group that you create. Another option is that you give along with the username and password verification a so-called radius vendor-specific attribute. The Juniper Wlan solution does support a specific attribute, a vendor-specific attribute, that is sent along as an authorization attribute upon a successful authentication. That attribute then tells the Ringmaster server to which Ringmaster group that particular authenticated user should belong, and then it will inherit the rights of that group. The vendor-specific attribute item is then the group name, the name as it is reflected in the user access groups. Let's disable this for now and go back to the user access groups. So whatever group a user should belong to, whether you do that via the local database as we do here, or via a radius vendor-specific attribute, the names and the groups are specified here. And it is, as you might have seen now, by group that user inherit rights. Let's create another user access group. We're now going to create a user access group for monitoring rights. So we call that monitoring users. And we only give them monitoring privileges. Now, the nice thing is that you can give a user that is a member of a group that has monitoring rights either full monitoring rights. It can then monitor your wireless network environment, which means that it can have a look at alarms, it can have a look at the monitoring environment, and that's about it. It can't see the configuration. And if you want to go a step further, it is even possible to restrict to what the user actually can see within your network plan. You maybe can imagine that you have a network plan with multiple sites and multiple controllers and maybe mobility domains configured, and then it is possible to restrict it. Imagine the situation that you have one Ringmaster server servicing multiple schools in a school district, but you want the IT responsible for one of the schools only to view its own controller or its own mobility domain. Then you can set a scope restriction. A scope restriction can be per mobility domain, which is a fixed set of controllers that belong together and work together, participate in that mobility domain. And then you can select the name of the mobility domain that you want to give rights to. Another option is a Wlan controller. The downside of a Wlan controller option is that if you have multiple, like here, you only can select one. The next option is per SSID. If you want to give somebody rights for a particular SSID that only resides in one location, you can even do a monitoring privilege per SSID. Of course, per SSID monitoring is something that is supported in the Ringmaster client environment based on a special license. The last scope restriction on equipment level is the equipment group. The benefit of an equipment group is that within an equipment group, which you then can select by name here only, you can combine individual controllers or mobility domains and individual controllers. So you have a bit more flexibility due to the creation of an equipment group. The other scope restriction that you could specify is site. You can select a site and then say all the controllers in one site or another site. And you see that actually site 1 and 2 are both combined in a location group. So if you want to give a restriction to site 3, you can do it this way. But if you want to give a restriction to site 1 and 2, it actually would not work because you can only select one site. But via the creation of a location group, you can give combined monitoring view for both the sites. And that's what you see here with the location group. The other options that we have is an outdoor area selection, where you can select the outdoor areas. Or per building, you can see which building from which site or which location group you want to give access to, or monitoring privilege better set. And the same you can do for a particular floor. Especially in a situation where you have a building with multiple floors, you can give monitoring view rights to a particular floor. Let's set one up for the mobility domain. Select a mobility domain. No planning scope restriction, and create this monitoring user group. So let's now create a user access group where we do not only have monitoring privileges, but also configuration privileges. Let's create a user. Configuration view user. We're going to give monitoring privileges as we said. And we're going to give configuration privileges. These configuration privileges can be scope restricted. And then we have the same options: equipment group, mobility domain, Wlan Controller. Note that we don't have the SSID here like we had with monitoring. And as well for the planning scope, we've got location group, site, outdoor area, building, and floor. However, we're going to give full configuration privileges, but the other restriction that we can add here is instead of giving editing capabilities, we allow these users only to view the configuration, which means that they can view the full configuration, but cannot change a thing. Let's create that group. And there you see we've got the 3 groups now here. You can see that the view user group has a configuration right, but you don't see what exact rights they have. So if you want to have a clue about the rights that a particular user has, you have to select the user and click on view. And then you see the rights. If we now go back to settings, we can create another user. So let's add a user here. That is a config view user. And let's take out user 1. That's a nice one. It's easier. We make it a member of the config view user group. Give it a password. Click add. So the user has now been added. You also see those users are not locked because they've not done any erroneous login attempts. And let's now go to the Ringmaster client. We are now at our Ringmaster client. We're going to log in with our user 1 and the password. Click next. You see we have a successful login. That's great. And there we see our mobility domain, which actually has a cluster and a couple of controllers. We can view a single controller. We can view an equipment group with 2 controllers, and we even have an equipment group with a mobility domain with 2 and a standalone controller. You also see that when we select a mobility domain, we can see the primary seat and we can see the controls, but we don't have the ability to move any controls. Neither do we have any tasks available here on the right-hand side in the task panel. All the creation of new controllers, new equipment groups, all those kind of things are not available. If we would go into our cluster configuration, and we go to the system section where we have VLAN pools, we cannot do any creations there. If we go to the wireless section where we have some wireless services, neither is it possible to go in there and change any of the properties. We're actually not even allowed to view the detailed properties there. We just see an SSID, and no other changes are available here. These are all the side effects of the viewing rights that we have as a view-only user. If we now close our session and we connect once again, but now we log in with the admin user, and we click next, then you will see that all those tasks on the right hand side are available again. Let's go back to Ringmaster services and create one last user. I'm going to create a user called Monitor. Make it a member of the monitoring users group. Give it a password. Add it to the list. We go back to Ringmaster. Disconnect once again. Connect. We log in as monitor user. You now see that for our network plan, we have monitoring rights, but our monitoring rights are limited to the mobility domain that we have selected the monitoring rights for. We can look up clients, we can go into alarms, and we can run reports, but all we can do is limited to this mobility domain. That brings us to the end of this Learning Byte about Ringmaster user access. Thank you for joining me on this Learning Byte, and I hope to meet you again on a future Learning Byte on any other Juniper technical topic. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.